All right, everybody. As we get started, may I ask for a volunteer who would run around the room with a microphone for those who have something to share? Who might do that for us, who's not eating breakfast or working on a crossword puzzle? Oh, Dave. Dave's going to do that. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. If you're new to our class, we're glad you're here. The reason we use the microphone is that there are people who watch and participate online, and we're really glad to have them here. But it is hard for them to hear you if you don't use the microphone. So thank you. Let's start with a prayer, and then we'll dig into our lesson. The prayer we're going to offer is right at the top of the handout. It's also at the top of the screen. Let's read this prayer out loud together. Almighty and everlasting Father, you have given the Holy Spirit to abide with us forever. Bless, we pray, with his grace and presence, the bishops and the other clergy and the laity soon to be assembled in your name, that your church, being preserved in true faith and godly discipline, may fulfill all the mind of him who loved it and gave himself for it, your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. This is a 4-week series on what could potentially be the most boring, dull topic we could ever discuss, General Convention. I love General Convention, but I kind of recognize that it's this thing that happens every 3 years, and a lot of stuff happens that we never even hear about. So my goal in this class is, of course, not to bore you to tears, but to maybe spark a little interest in the way that our church makes decisions at the denominational level. I try not to use the word national level because the Episcopal Church is much bigger than the United States. The Episcopal Church, our church with our prayer book, has dioceses in places like Haiti, places like Taiwan, all over the world. And so as a result, it's not helpful to talk about the national church or national decisions. And as you'll see, maybe in one of the resolutions we'll look at today, it's good to remember that national doesn't usually cut it. But anyway, so talking about the Episcopal Church maybe spark some interest in how we make decisions as a denomination. But I want to start by asking you, for your feedback so far. If you've been participating in this class, and maybe even if you haven't, would anybody raise your hand if you think this class, that's not a good way to put it. Raise your hand if you feel anxious at all about General Convention, about what will happen at General Convention. Yep, one of us, one or two of us. All right, raise your hand if you are not anxious at all about General Convention, but you are interested in what happens at General Convention. All right, yep. I want to ask you to raise your hand if you're not interested at all. You can finish your breakfast and enjoy your time. I have served in churches where everyone is on edge as General Convention approaches. Everybody's anxious because it feels like people we don't know, we have never met and will never meet, will make huge, profound life, doctrine, church, worship, altering decisions that we'll have to figure out how to live with. That's not the feeling that I get here. And as I was preparing for this class, it occurred to me to ask, only because I really hope that I'm not creating or elevating anxiety. I've got zero anxiety about General Convention because I trust that whatever happens, we'll receive in stride. And if we don't like it, we'll just ignore it. At least to the extent that we can, right? Because we are a curious church that even though these decisions are made at the top, we're actually a bottom-up church. And so although eventually things like changes to our liturgy, changes to our canons, changes to our observation, eventually those will trickle down to us. Really, it's up to us to accept them, embrace them, and put them into practice. And I don't experience a lot of tension in this community about that, even though I've experienced that a lot in the past. So I appreciate your feedback and give me a chance to think about that a little bit. All right, so we talked about General Convention in general as a structure, a process, and what does it mean. Then last week we looked at liturgical issues, And this week we're looking at everything else, which, as you'll see on the handout, is a lot more than just liturgical issues. Next week, I've got a lot to say about the presiding bishop election, and I've got some pretty controversial and inflammatory things to say about the presiding bishop election. So stay tuned. Come back next week for that. But let me start with these introductory questions, and I've kind of primed the room a little bit for them if you were here earlier. So let me start with the question that I didn't ask ahead of time, which is, what's an issue? What's a public issue, a social issue, a national issue, a global issue that you would like to see the Episcopal Church take a public stand on? What's something that you want to see the Episcopal Church be out in front, proclaiming to the world that this is what matters to us? What's something that you want the church to take a stand on? And if you'll raise your hand, David will bring you the microphone. Yep.
I would like the Episcopal Church to take a stand on reparations.
Yep, thank you. Reparations. Jeannie?
The independence of Taiwan.
The independence of Taiwan. Thank you. Yep, Jonathan, over in the corner. Yep.
Poverty abolition.
Poverty what?
Abolition.
Poverty abolition. Thank you. What else? What else do you think? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I don't think we pay enough attention to children in distress that are homeless or food insecure, and I think that is a big problem, and especially in Northwest Arkansas with such large food producers here. We don't pay any attention to that, and it's a real problem that they're living in cars with their families or they're homeless and they have nobody. So I'd like to see that.
Thank you. Susie, and then Richard.
Gun safety.
Gun safety. Thank you. Richard.
This goes back to children who are facing food insecurity. It's very specific, but I would like to see us support free school breakfast and free school lunches.
Yeah, thank you. What else? As we turn to our subject today, I want you to think about the things that you've heard or the other things that matter to you, and I want you to think about what the Episcopal Church's voice is and sounds like and how it matters on those issues, right? And what does it mean for the Episcopal Church to take a stand? Is that about advocacy? Is that about import? Is it about the allocation of budgets and structures? Is it about changing the way that the church functions? Just think about that and think about the ways that we actually have the power to make a difference, whether it's simply by saying we think all children should have enough food to eat and decent shelter, or is it about changing the way that we engage financially, physically, structurally, in terms of how we talk about mission? So just think about that. We'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, so this is the question I primed you on, and the reason I asked ahead of time is I think this is a hard question. I think most of us experience the Episcopal Church primarily, if not exclusively, through worship. I see a lot of you on Sunday mornings and never again during the week, and that's okay. I'm glad you're here. But last week we talked about the worship stuff. So what about everything else? Like, what's something you would change about the church? What's something you would change about how the church is run, how the church is structured, how the church is governed, how the church does church? Not just the mechanics, but also anything. What's one thing you would change about the church that isn't about baptism and isn't about communion and isn't about worship and isn't about prayer? What's something you might change? Dean.
I'm fairly new to the church and faith overall, so I didn't know until Elizabeth found what an Episcopalian was. Yeah. There's no visibility, and I think it's a catch-22 since we're a bottom-up church that it's easy to look at a figurehead like the Pope in Catholicism, but so many people. I had a friend that came to a funeral service, and he was telling me about this church right off Dixon, and after some more talking, it came here for it,
It's
and
our
he was
church.
really impressed. Yeah, but he had no idea what an Episcopalian was.
Yeah, right,
And it's out there. Like, we noticed it in a Bob's Burger episode, but it's more of a tagline that is glossed over. And I think just being able to make, maybe not marketing, because that kind of sounds yucky for a church to market itself, but we're very happy here, and I think it's a great place for more people to find out, but we gotta have a more concerted effort to get the voice out there.
Yeah. You need to be on either the Evangelism and the Future of the Church Committee or the Data-Driven Initiatives Committee, right? Yeah. Those are going to be right up your alley. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, What else? Yeah.
Yeah, have had that same thing on my mind. I grew up Mormon, and that's kind of on the extreme of marketing your church. But, I mean, I didn't know anything about the Episcopal Church till I read an article in the newspaper about Gene Robinson. And I thought I knew a lot about religion, so it has to be a little more visible than that, I think.
Yeah, we're really bad at that. Yeah, thank you. Elizabeth?
Connectivity. I don't know what it is, but you're saying, like I think too, we see people on Sunday, but we never see them anywhere else. And I think a lot of people feel like their schedule's so busy, they don't have time to do anything else, but I don't think they're aware there's some things you can only do once a month for 1 hour, and you can still be a vital part of this church.
Yeah.
And so I think identifying some of those opportunities for those individuals that would like to do something but can't fully commit to a big commitment, but maybe a small one.
Yeah, thank you. What else? Michael Curry, the current presiding bishop, until November, he'll be our presiding bishop, is, in my experience, the most visible, publicly recognized figure in the Episcopal Church since maybe William Temple, the Archbishop of Canterbury during World War II, or, I mean, it's been a long time since we've had that, and still nobody knows, right? Also, on the other side of that is, like, the House of Bishops, the way the Episcopal Church is run, it's a mess right now. It's a mess. I hear from bishops and diocesan staff, not just here but elsewhere, that like we have had a leader who's a visionary and a public figure, but has not tended to the mechanics and the administration of the Episcopal Church. Like, our bishop has told us, like, we don't know what's going on. Nobody's telling us anything. Which is to say that the way we're structured doesn't allow someone to either be a public figure or to do both, to be a public figure, and the church doesn't know how to run itself. So it's really, that's not just about identifying more leaders like Michael Curry, but it's also about restructuring, re-governing, re-equipping people with the actual gifts to do the stuff they need to do so that someone with the gifts like Michael Curry can be out front. I promise the next presiding bishop will not be that dynamic. Partly because all the candidates aren't that dynamic. Maybe Rob Wright's pretty dynamic, but I think the bishops are going to choose somebody who's really good at order and structure because they see it falling apart at the seams. And they're going to choose somebody who doesn't have that charisma because we can't afford 9 more years of charisma to the peril of structure, right? Anyway, so it's hard. Those are hard things, right? Yeah, General Convention is kind of where that happens, but let's talk more about that. So let me remind you that every resolution that comes to General Convention is assigned to a legislative committee. Here are 22 legislative committees, but you'll notice that a couple of them are numbered twice because they have different groups that meet. But just look at this, right? Last week, everything we talked about was Committee 10. Everything. Everything we talked about last week was Committee 10. There are at least 21 other committees that get attention and work. So today we're going to talk about all the rest, which is to say we're not going to talk about all the rest because there's way too much for us to talk about. But if you brought a resolution to General Convention, if you're a bishop, if you're a deputy, if you're a diocese, if you're one of those interim bodies, if you bring somebody a resolution to General Convention, it's going to be assigned to one of these committees. And if you're a deputy of General Convention or a bishop, you may be assigned to one of these committees that's going to hear, debate, and vote on whether to recommend a resolution be adopted by convention or not adopted by convention. But just look at the wealth and the breadth of church that is here. Some of these are internal stuff. Constitutions and canons, rules of order, Title IV disciplinary canons, Title III ministry. All of those are like very much church geek, in the weeds. How are we going to do what we do? Nobody gets excited about that stuff unless you are a church geek or nerd like I am. But those absolutely matter. The other things are more interesting. They have more pizzazz or appeal, like racial truth-telling, reckoning, and healing, evangelism in the future of the church, environmental stewardship and care of creation. But those things are also important, but we've got to find ways to balance all of the work that we have to do and still be effective and do it in 6 days of legislative work for convention. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Any questions about legislative committees before we dig in and look at some of the resolutions I want to give our attention to? Any questions or comments so far? All right. Let's dig in. So I've given you 2 more pages of topics that I find interesting. You might find some things interesting that I have not mentioned. But notice I've broken them down by committee, and only the ones in bold are the ones that we're going to look at in detail. Of all the things I've put on these pages, I was thinking about this morning. Of all the things I've put on these pages, I think the 2 or 3 resolutions that General Convention will adopt that will have more of an effect on Episcopalians at St. Paul's than any other are the adoption of a budget, 3 years worth of budget, millions of dollars. Where's it going to be spent? Who's going to get it? What ministries are we going to support? That's a really big deal. 2, the presiding bishop election, which requires confirmation in the House of Deputies. So that's a big deal, and that'll be really important to us as well. I don't know. I think the third thing that I think will be most impactful on us is probably something really boring, like raising the clergy mandatory retirement age to 75. I think actually that will have if that passes, it'll have a profound effect on churches like St. Paul's and other churches. So just but we're not all that excited about talking about whether we should raise the mandatory retirement age from 72 to 75. That's not all that exciting, but I think that's the kind of thing that will have an effect. I've included a resolution on gun safety, and that really matters. I don't know if it'll make a difference, but it's important, and maybe talking about it is how it makes a difference. So I don't want to be cynical, but just look at all that I've identified, and look at how little we have time to talk about today. Let's start. Let me remind you about the V-Binder. I love the V-Binder. This is the virtual binder. If you go to vbinder.net, you too can read all of these resolutions. And you can search for them by subject matter, by keyword, by number or topic, or as I've pulled up on the screen, by committee. So you can look at all of these and many more. Let's see how many resolutions are currently active. It was 258 last time, 275, so that number is growing. That number is growing, and it will continue to grow into convention. All right, so let's start with communion across difference. Communion across difference. We're not going to read the whole resolution, but would someone please read the first 5 resolves, the ones that are on the screen? Let me zoom in so you can see it, and I'll scroll up as we get there. But would someone please read the first 5 resolves? Thank you, Susie.
Resolved, the House of Bishops concurring that the 81st General Convention directs the presiding bishop and president of the House of Deputies to appoint a 3rd task force on communion across difference, consisting of not more than 12 people, who represent the cultural, generational, racial, ethnic, and theological diversity in the church, including especially members from dioceses outside of the United States, and be it further resolved that half of the members appointed hold that marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman, half hold that marriage is a covenant between 2 people in the presence of God, and that all of those appointed seek a pathway toward mutual flourishing in the Episcopal Church, and be it further resolved that the task force will seek to build on the Blue Book reports of the previous 2 triennia, continuing to seek a lasting path forward for mutual flourishing, consistent with this church's polity, and the 2015 Communion Across Difference statement of the House of Bishops affirming, 1, the clear decision of General Convention that Christian marriage is a covenant open to 2 people of the same sex or of the opposite sex. 2, General Convention's firm commitment to make provision for all couples asking to be married in this church to have access to authorized liturgies, and also affirming, 3, the indispensable place that the minority who hold to this church's historic teaching on marriage have in our common life, whose witness our church needs. Go on.
Yep, one more.
And be it further resolved that the task force consult widely with members of this church to represent its diversity of cultural background, age, race, gender identity, and sexual orientation, particularly its members in countries other than the United States, and also with representatives from the Anglican Communion, our full communion ecumenical partners, and those churches with whom we carry an ecumenical dialogues.
Thank you. That's good. All right. Anybody surprised by that text? What do you think about that? Yeah, Dave's surprised by that.
Well, I'm surprised that they're making a point of including half the people who hold that a marriage is a covenant between man and woman. I thought that was like decided for the church.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. What else do you notice? What else would you say about this resolution? What does it surprise you? Does it encourage you? Is it problematic for you? What does this tell you about the work of the church? And that we would be proposing that we spend $75,000 to implement this budget so that that group can have the support that they need to, with that much money, maybe meet in person, but it's hard to get 12 people from all over the world together, even for one meeting for less than $75,000, right? So maybe that only means virtually. So anyway, but it's still significant. So what does it tell you about our church that that's being debated at this coming convention? Yeah, Sarah, and then Jeannie.
I think that what happened with the bishop from New York, Bishop Love, that it kind of heightened the awareness of those who, particularly those in ordained roles, who don't uphold the church's stance on the marriage blessing and the sacrament for everybody. And there are still laity and clergy who hold to, as it says, the church's historic teaching on marriage. And so I think that I would hope that some of the funding would be for documentation to help congregations and dioceses hold those conversations and set a precedent for dialogue, and kind of like what the Chicago consultation did for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jeannie.
It seems like there's pushback. I mean, basically what Sarah said, but pushback from people that are kind of catching a wave of some of the nationalistic kind of stuff going on in our nation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it feels.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you. I think there's a relationship between the fact that I don't feel tension about General Convention at St. Paul's and the fact that at least some of us are surprised that the church is having this conversation, right? Because actually the Episcopal Church in a lot of places, like the River Delta, are places where it's still hard to accept that the Episcopal Church's policy is that marriage is open to people, whether it's a same-sex couple or an opposite-sex couple. That's still hard in some places. And the fact that we aren't willing to become two separate churches, or that we aren't willing to lose connection with people who have a view different than the majority is, I think, significant in the Episcopal Church. Yeah, Jeannie.
Some of the things literature I've been reading, or not literature, research, whatever, however you want to, sociology research, has been informing me that even within the Episcopal Church, just like 60, 70 years ago, excluded African Americans from worshiping with us. So, that's pretty recent.
Yeah.
To have, changes, or I guess you can change on one area and then You don't, you still have a strain didn't change.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, as far as being progressive is concerned.
Yeah. And as I said earlier, we're a bottom-up church. And these are decisions that are being made from the top down. And it takes a while for some places to say, oh, yeah, that's who we are. And the intention behind that is interesting. We don't have time to read it, but this, A resolutions that come from those interim bodies, as you can tell from this resolution, this is the third time the General Convention is being asked to appoint a task force to do this work. And every task force submits a report to General Convention in the Blue Book, as you saw a reference to. This is their Blue Book report. You can find it online. I can help you find it. Those are the members of the task force, including Bonnie Perry, who's a friend of our church and has been here before, and some other people whose names you might recognize. But look, I want to read just one paragraph of it. Maybe I don't. It's beautiful work. It's important work. And it's just surprising to me that the church would take time, spend money, and focus on a conversation that it would be easy to feel like it was settled because we've adopted a liturgy, and yet clearly not settled in the hearts and minds of everyone. Change happens slowly. And interestingly enough, this group has helped the wider church recognize that, this is a liturgical bit, that it's really important that same-sex marriage liturgies have the same standing as a prayer book marriage liturgy, that it's not an exception or an appendix. But at the same time, those who hold the traditional view, it's really important to them that the version that we have stay in the prayer book. And this group has said after their hard work that actually those aren't mutually exclusive. Like, we don't have to lose one in favor of the other. It's possible for us to hold both. And that becomes a good model not just for how we deal with issues of human sexuality, but also other issues that face the church. It helps us remember that just because General Convention makes a decision doesn't mean that every Episcopalian is on board, because we're not a top-down church. It's not the way church works, and I'll venture to guess it's not the way any church works, even if the official function of the church, like in the Roman Catholic Church, is top-down. It doesn't actually work that way. It always works bottom-up. Other reflections about this resolution or the work that's represented in it? Yeah, Susie.
There was a sentence in what we previously read.
Yep.
About being, I think, in partnership with full ecumenical communion partners, something like that. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah.
Our full communion ecumenical partners.
Yeah, this bit right here.
Yeah.
So we have relationships outside the Episcopal Church with churches like the Church of Nigeria, full Anglican church, it's a member of the Anglican Communion. The Church of Nigeria has zero interest in being in a relationship with a church that says marriage is open to people in same-sex or opposite sex, at least on the structure, the surface of it. Of course, it's always more complicated than that. But those relationships matter, and we don't want to ignore those. So in addition to caring about relationships inside the church, we also care about relationships beyond that. In terms of full communion partners, the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, full communion partner, that matters. The Methodist Church is not a full communion partner yet, but we're working toward that, as we'll see a little later on. There are some other full communion partners where to be a full communion partner means that we are willing to break bread together, share ordination together. We don't distinguish between how we do church, the outcome of how we do church, and the outcome of how you do church. But a change like this, a sacramental change, has impacts on those other relationships, and we don't want to thumb our nose at them. Yeah. Other reflections or questions about that? I just think it's interesting. We don't talk about that, but I think it's interesting. I find it really hopeful that the church is willing to do that work. Read the Blue Book report. It's great. This is an A resolution, right? A094. That task force has submitted this resolution for another 3 years for General Convention. That's how things work. All right, let's look at the next one. I skipped this earlier, but maybe this one has as much an impact on Episcopalians at St. Paul's as any other. Who would read for us, please? This is C0004. Who would read that? All four resolve clauses for us. Thank you, Mark.
That the 81st General Convention approves an assessment formula, Canon 146B, for for the period January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2027, based on a single assessment of each diocese in each year, 2025 to 2027. Diocesan total adjusted operating income as reported in the annual diocesan, can't have a problem with that one, financial report for the year 2 years prior to the year to which the assessment is applied. 2025 assessments are to be based on 2023-2024 actual income figures. Shall be reduced by $200,000 exemption. A single assessment shall be applied to the remaining amount balance at the flat rate of 13.5%, and be it further resolved that the 2025-2027 Episcopal Church budget shall be adjusted and managed as set forth in the canon rules of order and executive council policies and procedures, and be it further resolved that the 81st General Convention of the Episcopal Church asks executive council to set a plan for lowering the diocesan assessment to 10% by 2030.
All right, so what does that mean? It means that currently, every diocese in the Episcopal Church, there are 110 of them, every diocese is asked to pay 15% of its operating income to support the work of the wider church, 15%. There are exceptions for non-domestic dioceses where income is a lot smaller in places like Honduras. Also, that $200,000 exemption is standard. So like the idea is that the diocese should have, the first thing the diocese should do is have a bishop. We've got to have a bishop. So the first $200,000 does not get taxed. I don't like that word, but I'm going to use it because it's convenient. Taxed. So you got $200,000 to spend on a bishop. And then everything else, 15% goes to the denomination, to the Episcopal Church, for things like the presiding bishop and the Episcopal Church and the budget and the $75,000 that is being proposed to enable that task force to meet for another 3 years. Right? It takes a lot. This resolution and several others like it say we're tired of 15%. We don't think that's a wise use of our resources. We think those resources would be better kept in Arkansas. We think the Executive Council of Arkansas and our bishop should have the extra 5% to do ministry with here, that it's getting lost. So we want to reduce it from 15% to 13.5%, and by 2030 to 10%. We want to go down to 10%, a tithe. That's all the Bible asks. Why should the Episcopal Church ask for more? Arkansas, the Diocese of Arkansas, at our diocesan convention, we proposed a similar resolution. It wasn't quite as full, so I didn't choose that one to look at. This one I thought did a better job of expressing it, but we are one of many dioceses who are following Oklahoma's lead. This is from Oklahoma. That are saying, yeah, we are tired of giving 15%. We think it should be lower than that. We think it should be 10%. What do you think about that? Sounds good? Who doesn't think we should keep more money for ourselves? Yeah, but what about the things that we can't do by ourselves? What about relationships? What about dioceses where bishops make really big mistakes and do really bad things? And we need an Episcopal Church to address that publicly and thoroughly and provide for transitions in leadership and the consultants that we need to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. What about that? What about the work of reparations? How are we supposed to commit to the work of reparations if we're keeping more money for ourselves, right? What does that look like? Stewardship of creation, like what? So how does that work? Do we have a presiding bishop who we want to see publicly and visibly, but we recognize isn't able to be the public figure and the administrator that we need? That means somebody else is going to have to do it. We're cutting budgets. How's that going to work? The church is declining. Is the right thing for us to do to withdraw resources or pump more? So it's actually hard. It's a hard conversation. And even harder is, when do we do it? Thoughts about this, questions about this, comments about this? Yeah, Elizabeth.
It's not a very in-depth view, but when you were talking about, the first thing that came to my mind when you were talking about Bishop Curry being so prominent in the, and charismatic or whatever, and then we didn't have the other side. Maybe that 5% needs to go to getting a bishop of administration and then letting the other person do the other upfront part.
Yeah.
Would that be great? We can
Yeah.
have both. Wouldn't
Yeah.
that be beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, you remember that episode of West Wing? I've throw a lot of West Wing references out, but that episode where the guy who used to work on the submarine, I don't remember his name, is countering those who would say the military ends up spending a whole lot of money unnecessarily, and he takes a hammer, maybe it was a wrench actually, and smashes a glass ashtray, an ashtray that cost $5,000 for an ashtray, and then he shows that it breaks into round, smooth pieces that aren't dangerous. And he goes, when you're on a submarine, right, you actually need things to be different, right? There's this fiction that that we know better how to spend that money and that it's getting lost. And sometimes it does get lost in the breakdown of efficiencies. And yet, sometimes actually someone in an office in New York City knows better than we do in Arkansas about what the needs of the church are. And yet we have to be in relationship and keep that check and balance. It's just really hard. It's hard work. It's hard to do. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah, Sarah.
The past experiences of General Convention, typically when the budget has to be cut at the higher executive level, it tends to be things like youth programming, other kind of formation things, discipleship, evangelism, that tend to be cut.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, the reparations. So I think about all the benefits that we get from the Sacred Ground curriculum, or that our youth ministers and formation directors get from the budget. I think about the things that are normally cut, kind of like in our public schools, the things that are first to go, or the arts programs. So some of the things that we see and experience most directly from the lay perspective are the things that are cut. But it sounds like the House of Bishops experiences a cut in their own formation and thinking about continuing education as clergy. So just thinking about how much discernment is involved when you go to cutting, and we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars. We're probably talking about $1 million. It's a significant cut.
Yeah.
If we think about our St. Paul's budget, we run it to the T, and it's very tight. And there's what's not important in what we do. It's similarly just on a bigger scale for the wider church.
Yeah. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Dave.
So Sarah mentioned Sacred Ground. I was trying to think what does the larger church do with stuff like that, right? So with the money, right? So some things they do is they build curriculum. And the 10%, the 5% that's supposedly moving from the national church back down to the local churches. When you run something like reparations work, that can just there are some things that can just as easily be spent at a local level. So it's just feels like a shift of sort of who do you trust to run the business so much that.
Yeah, I wish I had it here. I don't see it. Yeah, the budget is $143,191,157. 5%'s a lot. There's a lot you can do with 5% of $145 million, right? Yeah. Jeannie.
It seems like for the things that we wish to do locally, maybe this might already be in place as a grant application situation where you can apply to have money returned to your area to fulfill those things that you wish to do.
Yeah, they have it, actually. I'm not sure if it still works, but mission enterprise zones were really big about 6 years ago, or maybe 9, I can't remember which general convention, but part of the church was saying, actually, Texas doesn't need any more money. Texas has got lots of money. Let's all borrow Texas's money and do important things in places like Arkansas or Oklahoma, where we need the money, right? Anyway, so sometimes that works, but it's like taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes, but we all need the fire department, right? Nobody wants to pay taxes, but we need health and human services when we need it, right? Yeah, it's complicated. All right, let's look ahead at the next one. Jim Norris, would you read for us this resolution AO15, owning a commitment to reparations? And let's read the whole thing, please, sir.
That the 81st General Convention of the Episcopal Church endorse the creation of an independent reparations fund commission with its convener, and at least 60% of its membership being persons of color. And be it further resolved that the establishment of this commission will be overseen by the Episcopal Coalition for Racial Equity and Justice. And be it further resolved that the charge to the commission is the creation of a substantial fund from the TEC assets, the purpose of which is a sustained, meaningful, tangible response to the historic and ongoing legacy of slavery and displacement of indigenous peoples of what is now the United States. And be it further resolved that the magnitude of this fund and date for accomplishing the target amount will be determined by the commission. And be it further resolved that the Reparations Fund Commission or an entity that it approves will be responsible for defining and implementing payments of reparation.
Thoughts about this? What do you think? What do you think? Yeah, Sarah.
I noticed that they haven't allocated any funding for it.
Yeah, that's always dangerous. How's it going to get done? Are we asking people to volunteer? To volunteer to fly to a convenient location to do this work? Three years. I was the chair of an interim body. It takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of travel and a lot of money to do that work. If we really care about this, where's the money going to come from? Right? Yeah. What else? What else? What else do you notice? What else is interesting to you? I'm gonna look and see what Scott Gunn has to say about this. You might remember that right there, that was it. That was where I wanted to be. Scott Gunn, longtime deputy president of Forward Movement, where we get forward day by day. Anyway, he has a great sort of breakdown of all the resolutions. He will vote yes, but only if amended. And I bet what you suggest, the challenge here is that the mechanism for doing this, right there, exactly what you've said, Sarah, right? There's no money set aside. How are we going to do it? How are we going to get it done? If we vote for this and we pat all ourselves on the back, look at what we've done, but we haven't spent any money on it, then it's not going to get done. All we've done is pat ourselves on the back and get a headline in the newspaper. But if we're going to spend money on it, it means we're going to not spend money on something else. Where's it going to come from? Yeah, Sarah's got to follow up. Yes, Sarah.
I think that following the pandemic, there's been a lot of work done online, and I think that if it could be amended to say that this work will be done virtually and there will not be tangible expenses aside from the time, that could set a precedent for resolutions to show here's how we're allocating our funds. We're not asking for money to be given towards travel. We're going to all commit to it virtually.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet, but I remember back when we were dealing with our task force that the General Convention office has an estimate in a book for how many people on your task force and how many in-person meetings are you going to have, and are you going to do your work virtually? And even just to do your work virtually, it's some ridiculous amount, like $50,000 for a triennium to get that work done, because you got to pay for subscriptions and Zoom subscriptions and publishing, and somebody's going to have to print this stuff. And anyway, it's insane. It's insane, right? The way that works. But yeah, hopefully virtual. And what I want to say, as you were speaking, it reminded me, you got to start somewhere, and maybe in the sausage making that is the General Convention legislative process, maybe we all kind of have to hold our noses to do what we have to do. But sometimes you got to start somewhere. Better than nowhere. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Other reflections on this? Yeah.
Just a factual question. So Beloved Community Initiative was a church-wide initiative. Was that a thing that was started from a convention resolution, or is that something? Okay.
Yep. Yes. And there's a resolution to continue that work in the amount of $1 million for the triennium. However,
okay, so that one's got funding.
However, Scott Gunn notes that it looks like it's already in the budget, the draft budget, so we don't need another $1 million to do it. So sometimes things get complicated, but it looks like that's become a priority. So he says, I'm going to vote no on it because we're already spending that money to do that work and we don't need to do it twice, he would say. But again, as I said last week, Scott Gunn and I don't always agree on how we would vote, though I often do. Thoughts? Other thoughts about reparations? Jim, up front. Thank you.
The very last portion of that resolution bothers me a little bit, when it's a bit unclear when it says implementing payments of reparation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who takes responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think there's a lot of divestment of authority and trust through this resolution, right? We're going to appoint a group of people, at least 60% of whom are people of color, and we're going to let them tell us how to spend that money. Like, that's hard. And that's, in some ways, that's the hard work of reparations, right? It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. All right, that's one example. Let's keep going because we only have 4 minutes left. Let's keep going. We're not going to read this one because, not because it's not important, but this resolution affirming the goal of full communion between the Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Church, this resolution, written by an interim body, you'll see A049, was submitted many months ago. It was before the Methodist Church had their general conference this summer, where they said, yes, let's keep doing it. So I think what's going to come through General Convention is going to be far more specific than this. All this says is, we like that work, let's keep doing it. I have a feeling that by the time we get to General Convention in a week, it starts a week from today. By the time we get to General Convention, there will be some specific movement, and we'll be able to adopt something other than we think it's a good idea. But this resolution says we think it's a good idea, but stay tuned because more is going to come from it. We're not going to read this one either. Let me see what the last one. No, this is the last one. Let me think. Maybe we'll read this one. All right, let's read this one. We won't read the whole thing. But who would read for us, pretty please? Let's read. Let me see if I can get it as big as possible and still fit on the screen. Who would read for us, please? Let's read those first, just the resolves on the screen. Who would read those for us, please? Yep, thank you. Jonathan or Mark, either way.
Okay. Resolve the House of Deputies concurring that the 81st General Convention enable concrete implementation of the bold charge laid out in the GC 80 resolution and A087 net carbon neutrality by 2030, which encouraged Episcopal congregations, dioceses, schools, camps, and other Episcopal institutions to pursue ambitious goals for reducing the church's carbon footprint, mitigating climate change, and living more sustainably and gently on God's good earth. And be it further resolved that the 81st General Convention charge and fund the creation of advancement of 4 strategic churches network in order to promote carbon reduction intervention in areas where there is a demonstrated passion and leadership, and B, potential for dramatic collective action and impact.
Let's stop there. Thank you. That's great. What do you think? What do you notice? Carbon neutral? Sounds good. Who's going to do it? How's it going to get done? Scott Gunn has great criticism of this. He said, the Episcopal Church, we have succeeded in requiring that all clergy have safeguarding training and background checks. We have required that all churches submit financial reports and be audited. We've required all these things. We've done that successfully. Like, all we're doing here is saying, we want to continue to encourage people to do it. Sounds like a good idea. And it doesn't have to just be, would you please maybe consider it? We could be more bold than this. We could require all congregations, dioceses, schools, camps, etc., to become carbon neutral by 2030, or to have a plan to become carbon neutral by 2030, or something. But the reason I wanted to read this is it ties in with some of the other things we didn't read, which is the Episcopal Church can make a profound difference in the world. Part of the difference we make is by standing up as a religious institution and naming what a lot of people wouldn't expect the church to name, which is that people have equal share in God's love and God's sacraments regardless of their gender, regardless of their sexuality. That's a bold thing for the church to say. We can also say things like war is bad, pollution is bad, but we're not the only ones saying that, so maybe there's a better way to think about that, is how can we make a difference? Maybe we need to start thinking not just about what we can tell others to do, but what we're going to do ourselves and how we're going to get it done. Will we not just say that the war in Gaza is bad, but will we do something about it? Will we allocate money? Will we develop new educational programs? Will we, I don't know, something that will make a difference, something that isn't just a word. Sometimes words matter, and I think they matter in particular because the church has a unique moral position and platform upon which to articulate a lot of that. However, in many of these issues, we're not the only ones, and we're not even the primary ones to do it, but we can do things like change the way clergy are trained for ministry, change the way our catechism is taught, change the way we allocate money, change the way we require reports to be filed or carbon neutral plans to be established. We can do those things, and General Convention is the place that it happens. So I love resolutions like this, which say what everybody, maybe not everybody, what many of us would say is a jolly good thing. But as you can tell from the resolution, the last time we had a General Convention, we said this was a good idea. And this time we're going to say it's still a good idea. And 3 years from now, are we still going to be saying it's a good idea, or will something change? So part of the challenge of General Convention is to give something teeth or to give something funding so that it'll make a difference. All right. That's it for today. There's so much to learn about General Convention. It starts officially a week from today. Pray for our deputies and our bishops who are traveling to Louisville for General Convention. A member of our church, Kim Lou Wald, is also going as a representative of Asian American Episcopalians. She's going to have a booth in the exhibitors hall. She's looking forward to coming back and telling us a little bit about her experience at General Convention. But I hope you will stay tuned. Come back next week for my inflammatory comments about the election of a presiding bishop. Thank y'all.